So we're at family dinner a few weeks ago. The kids are all playing on the field. It's getting dark, but the lights are still on, and my daughter falls and scrapes her elbow. The kids rally around, they get her a Band-Aid and get her all fixed up, and then they start comparing their boo-boos. So one of the little boys says, well, I have a boo-boo right here, and we can see his Band-Aid. And another little girl says, well, I have one right here. My daughter looks and she says, well, I don't see that. She goes, well, it's dark out here. I laugh because I can relate. Sometimes we have pain that's hidden in the darkness. Today we're going to talk about a woman named Hannah who also had pain that was hidden in the darkness. We're going to be in the book of 1 Samuel, starting in chapter 1. It says, there was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zophite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. One was called Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Now, we all know what a womb is, but if we zoom out, we know that a womb is hidden inside each woman. It's given to women to protect and grow something that God places inside of us. It isn't something that we can check or ask somebody else, how's it looking? But for Hannah, her womb was closed. So it was closed, but it wasn't empty. It carried a pain and a longing for something that God hadn't yet given her. It was a desire in her heart that had not yet been fulfilled, and she was waiting for God to create something in it. There was a longing for something that was completely out of her control. You see, her womb was closed, but it carried the pain and the emptiness that was hidden inside of her. Can you relate? If I were to ask you right now, what's in your womb, what would you say? In verse 6, it goes on to say, and because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. She wept and would not eat. You see, here we see that Hannah is being provoked by her rival, which we can assume is Peninnah. You see, they each had something that the other one wanted. You have Peninnah, who has children that Hannah wants. But then you have Hannah, who we just read the verses of where her husband, their husband, gave her double portions because he loved her. So Hannah had the love and admiration of her husband, which Peninnah wanted. But isn't that just how the enemy sneaks in? The enemy loves to remind us of what we don't have. He irritates us by something or maybe someone. And in this story, we can put a name to her rival, right? We can assume it's Peninnah. But if we're honest, we can put a name to our rival too. So if I were to ask you, who is provoking your pain or what is provoking your pain, what would you say? In this situation, we fill in that blank with Peninnah, but Ephesians 6:12 tells us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, and powers of the dark and spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. You see, our rival isn't the person, but the spirit of evil working through that person. Hannah's pain wasn't being provoked by Peninnah. It was being provoked by the enemy through Peninnah. Hannah's rival then is our rival now. You see, the enemy wants to amplify our pain. If our pain is amplified, we can't hear God. And he wants to provoke us so that we doubt God. The enemy's tactics then are his tactics now. He wants us to doubt, which creates questions, right? Did God really say? And if we don't take those questions back to the word, then it leads us to make assumptions about God. And those assumptions become lies that we start to repeat and believe, and it keeps us in the cycle that the enemy wants us in. You see, if the devil can keep us focused on what we don't have, then we miss what God has already given us, or what he's trying to show us. Hannah was provoked until the heaviness of her emotional pain took a physical toll. We see that she wept, she wouldn't eat, her face was downcast. Now her pain went from the womb to the world. Then what happened? I'm glad you asked. Verse 8 says, Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? So here comes Elkanah, bless his heart. His wife is sad, and he loves her, and he doesn't want her to be upset. So he does what probably anybody would do. He tries to be the fixer of it. First, he dismisses it, right? He dismisses her pain. He says, well, why are you sad? Why won't you eat? And then he tries to distract her from it. He says, do I not mean more to you than 10 sons? And I'm sure in Hannah's mind, she's thinking, well, gee, thanks, E. Like, now I'm not only sad because I don't have something that I really desire, but now I am feeling guilty that you think you aren't enough, right? He's trying to be something for her that he's not supposed to be. And I'm sure he means well, but let's face it, our husbands and our family, they aren't our Jesus. People mean well, but they aren't the healer. So what does Hannah do? Let's look in verse 9. Once they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, she stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. She made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but to give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life. No razor will ever be used on his head. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, How long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I'm a woman who is deeply troubled. I've not been drinking beer or wine. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I've been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you've asked of him. She said, May your servant find favor in your eyes. And then she went away and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. You see, in bitterness of soul, Hannah cried and prayed. And she prayed a real, raw, emotional prayer. The first part, she says, Oh, Lord Almighty. Now, this is how she addresses God. Now, we address the Lord Almighty because of all the works that we can find in his word. But when Hannah's praying, Oh, Lord Almighty, she goes back to what she knows about God. If we go back to Genesis 17, the Lord, God actually refers to himself as Lord Almighty when he is reminding Abraham of his covenant to give him children to he and Sarah. Hannah acknowledges God as the one who gives children to the childless. You see, she praises God in the very beginning for something that he has already done. The second part of her prayer, she goes on. She gets real about how she feels. I feel, look upon my misery, see me, remember me, hear me, do not forget me, know me. My desire is a son. And she could have ended her prayer right there, right? Amen. But the third part is where she surrendered it all to him. Then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. You see, Hannah understood that any gift from God was going to be for God. Verse 18 says, Then she went away and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Something happened in that prayer. Hannah's circumstances hadn't changed. She wasn't pregnant at the time, but the burden and the weight of her pain was actually lifted. She's able to eat again, and she's able to smile again. Let's keep going. Verse 19 says, Early the next morning they arose and worshipped before the Lord and then went back to their home at Ramah. Elkanah lay with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, Because I asked the Lord for him. When the man Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, After the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord and will live there always. Do what seems best to you, Elkanah, her husband told her. Stay here until you've weaned him. Only may the Lord make good his words. The woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. You see, here we see a shift from Elkanah trying to be the fixer of everything for Hannah to now Hannah is staying behind to honor her vow to the Lord. Whereas before she would honor her vow to her husband by going with him, now she's staying behind to honor her vow to the Lord. Hannah now has her relationship with God in the proper place. So verse 24, after he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with the 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When they had slaughtered the bull, they brought the boy to Eli, and she said to him, As surely as you live, my Lord, I'm the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. You see, Hannah's faith was in her follow-through. She gave back to the Lord what God had given her. She gave birth to Samuel, who we know now was the prophet who anointed King David, who is the direct bloodline of Jesus. So this wasn't just any baby that God was giving her. He was using Hannah's circumstances to actually draw her to a place of complete surrender, so that because of her struggle, she could see the purpose of God. Now, God didn't need Hannah, right? But He chose her to use her anyway. And would Hannah have given Samuel back to God if he would have been conceived on like a typical Thursday night? My guess is probably no. But when we recognize that what we have, everything that we have has been given to us, then we're humbled and responsible to give it back to God. When we see the things we have for our own glory, it creates pride and arrogance and entitlement. But when we use what we have been given for God's glory, there's extraordinary transformation. So when the situation that you're facing is hard, the weight of the pain is heavy, and the ability to change it is out of your control, like Hannah, let it lead us to a place of surrender instead of fear. When we acknowledge what's in our womb and surrender it to God, He can shine light into the darkness because that's what His glory does. Revelation 21:23 says the city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. So surrender the pain so you can hear God whisper over the lies. Let me show you that this is my child, not yours. Let me show you that I love you more than anyone. Let me show you that you can trust me more than you can trust your circumstances. And let me show you that I have not overlooked you, but I'm waiting for your eyes to look back at me. Jeremiah 29:11-13 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you." That is a promise that we can trust.